This episode of Tea with Jules is proudly brought to you by The Home. You can shop any of the items you see in this episode at thehome.com.au. Caroline Bernardi, thank you for joining me today on Tea with Jules.
Thank you for having me.
You've written this amazing book called Faith, Trust, Gratitude and Cancer.
I have.
Which, I mean, those words don't really associate with cancer, so I'm really interested to delve in and see why you put all of those words together for the title of your book.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, this is Tea with Jules.
Yes.
So my first question is, are you a tea drinker?
I absolutely am. Aside from plain water, tea is my drink of choice other than anything sparkling. So I'm very happy to be drinking.
Okay, good. We're drinking green tea today, so I feel like that's one of the best ones.
Beautiful, I agree.
So feel free to have the tea
Thank you.
we chat.
Thank you.
Now, tell me, you've got an incredible story, which you've shared in the book, but can you put it in a nutshell for us today and see how we ended up here?
I will do my best,
Okay.
my life's motto. In June of 2008, I was waiting to get my two daughters from dancing. They were aged 6 and 10 at the time. And I had the only way I can describe it is an overwhelming feeling. And it hit me and I just had a feeling, oh my gosh, I think I have cancer.
From nowhere.
From nowhere, which is unusual for me. I mean, I've never obsessed about my health. I've never been one to worry. And I went about just being very logical and methodical as I am as a person. And thought, well, this is ridiculous. Of course I don't. I'm healthy, I'm fit, I'm everything that I should be as, someone who was 44 years old at the time. But the feeling never left. In fact, it stayed with me for 6 months. I ended up visiting my doctor on 3 different occasions, and I also ended up seeing a psychologist whose job it was to convince me that I didn't have cancer. Because I had no symptoms, I didn't present as someone who has cancer. There was no lumps or bumps or fatigue or anything that you would expect. And my doctor did take it very seriously, but there was nothing that I presented with to make her think that it was anything more than a vent of something that I was frustrated with or something that wasn't quite right. Eventually in December of 2008, I was diagnosed with stage 3B, possibly stage 4 inoperable lung cancer, and it began from there.
So you were 100% right.
Yes,
and
I was.
That feeling you had for those 6 months, do you know that you had cancer at that point?
That was a question I did actually ask my oncologist when I began writing my story, because you do hear of people manifesting things, and when people put a curse on you or pointing the bone in Aboriginal mythology, and I thought maybe I've done it myself, but of course there's no way of absolutely knowing. But my oncologist, who I have a lot of faith and trust in, said with the stage that I was at in December, he said it's more than likely that I had it 9 to 12 months prior to actually being diagnosed.
Wow. How do you explain that feeling? Do you think it's like something divine or God? Is it just a feeling?
I think it's a combination of everything that you've mentioned, Jules. I think that everything is part of the divine, but I also think that all of us have that gut, that knowing, that inner guidance that tells us, oh, don't go down that dark path, don't turn that way if you're going to work, I'm going to take this road. And I think it was just that. I think there was something that that just said to me that you need to get this investigated, but I didn't trust it. I thought that the experts knew more than what I did, and I just thought I was going mad.
When you had the official diagnosis that you indeed had cancer, what was that moment like?
Everything for not only myself, but my husband, my children, my friends, my family. It changed in a breath. In the 5 seconds it took for the ear, nose and throat specialist, who was the one that discovered it, to say that you have cancer in your lymph nodes. I remember I was sitting in the car park at the supermarket, and I just remember feeling like letting out like a whimper, and just was almost like if you watch one of those chimneys explode, you know, count down and bang, it just, and that was me. I just went, ugh. And even though I'd lived with cancer for 6 months thinking, I'm sure I've got it, I'm sure I've got it, to actually hear those words, I went from being someone who was extremely capable, very together, organised, to being a shell of who I once was.
What was the prognosis they gave you? How long to live?
The first oncologist that I was referred to, when I said to him, will I see my children grow up? He said, I remember very clearly, he sort of leaned back in his chair and he said, well, with the time you have left, you'll see them grow up more than most. And I thought, how can I put my faith in someone who doesn't have any faith in me? I knew, courtesy of Dr. Google, that I had a chance, even if it was a small chance. But then I was since told when I found my existing oncologist that my chances were grim, and I had about a 5% chance of surviving.
I can't conceive of the idea of having to say goodbye to your family, your children. Horrible.
Terrible.
So you go into treatment.
We found my oncologist, and he was wonderful. And not only was what I believed the best in his field, but he was going to be the best for me. But I also knew, Jules, prior to meeting with Michael, that I needed to do more than just rely on Western medicine. It's not everybody's way, but it was my way. So I began getting my jigsaw puzzle pieces together in conjunction with Western medicine, with chemotherapy. And that was the plan, was to have chemotherapy, see how the tumours had gone, and then go through radiation. The tumours that I had were too widespread to have radiation in the first place. I had 3 tumours in my right lung, 2 in my left, and then I had infected cancerous lymph nodes up through my neck, the centre of my chest, and both of my shoulders as well. So the plan was to shrink it and then to move on from there.
So when you talk about the other things besides medicine, what are those things?
I knew I had to meditate. And I've always thought, still in your mind, great idea, but I don't really have time to do that, so I never have.
And then story for
yeah,
everyone, I think.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I thought, yeah, it's great, but it's really not for me. But I instantly began, I thought, I need to learn to meditate. So I pushed and I tried, and I used to lock myself in the bedroom for probably a good hour twice a day and sit on my mat and try. And of course, you know, nothing happened. But it was very difficult, but I persisted because just as that instinct had served me well the 6 months prior, I thought, I have to do this, I have to meditate. So meditation was a huge part of my jigsaw puzzle.
What did it, once you eventually got it, why was that good?
I was able to just truly be very, very still, and everything just seemed to sit outside of myself. Even the love for my children, which, oh my gosh, it just got me whenever I thought of who's going to do their hair for ballet, who's going to help them with their first formal dress.
I'm going to cry.
Who's just going to be there for them if I can't be there as a mother. So it helped me just shift from that and to just sit in that quiet space, even if it was for 5 minutes, even if it was for 1 minute, for half an hour, but enabled me to do that. And I came to the understanding that there was so much assistance around me in the form of, you know, the space above, the space below, and everything in between. I also embraced Chinese medicine, acupuncture, naturopathy. I really cleaned up my diet. Not that it wasn't great in the first place, but it was just refined a little bit. And I walked a lot. I was always, you know, good at exercising, but as my doctor said, you know, your lungs are great, other than a bit of lung cancer. And they were in really good shape. They were very clean and they were fine.
It doesn't choose, does it?
Absolutely not. It's the complete all-round non-discriminator, I think.
You're meditating, you're walking, you're cleaning up your diet, your Chinese medicining
Yeah.
and your modern medicining as well. You have a great doctor.
Yes, very much so.
What happens now?
It was great to have everything coming together, but I needed myself to be in that space. I was very good at putting everything together. I believe that everything that we go through in life has a purpose, and I drew on the not so good things from my childhood and I put them into play. I put in that determination, that independence, that I can do this, I can stand on my own 2 feet together, and embraced the being held by my friends, which I had never done before, by my husband, by sitting in that space of meditation, the Chinese medicine, and I embraced it wholly. On days where I couldn't get out of bed, as soon as I heard the birds singing, my hands would immediately cover my face, and I just didn't want to face the day. But if Simon or my friends weren't around, I would put on my runners, and if I felt sick, I would still go on my walk. And it was really tough for probably the first 6 weeks or so, 8 weeks. I read that you do get used to having cancer, and I waited to get used to having cancer, and it didn't happen. The chemotherapy didn't work. And even before I went into that final scan to see that the chemotherapy didn't work, amazing things had begun to happen. I had begun to smile. I had begun to think of my family, which brought a tear, but it was a tear of joy and true gratitude and happiness. And I began to cope. And it was a plan with an outcome that was completely unknown. All I had was just that little bit of hope that it was going to be okay. So I just kept on going and kept on hoping that things were going to work out. But if they didn't, I was doing okay. I was teaching my children resilience, and I was being a different mother, a mother that I'd never really been before, rather than tidying things up as I put them to bed or saying good morning and walking out the room when I had to wake them up in the morning. I'd get into bed with them and leave all their crap all over the floor. So I was actually changing as a mother at that point as well.
Amazing. So how far into your diagnosis was that?
So I was diagnosed on the 10th of December of 2008. That probably would have been towards the middle of February.
Okay.
And then at the end of February, I was to have a CT scan, and I knew that the CT scan hadn't worked because how I knew I had cancer just before I was diagnosed. So in November, I found 2 lumps in my neck that I knew weren't there before because I was so obsessed with my neck. And the hard lumps were even more hard, were even more fixed. So I had a visible reminder that I still had cancer. Then I began a clinical trial drug through Chris O'Brien Lifehouse, where my doctor works. That ended up being the final piece in the jigsaw puzzle, and that was when I went, I think I'm actually going to be okay.
Wow. Explain to me clinical trial. Is that
Sure.
the very first time it's been used on people just to test to see how it's going to go?
Sure. There are usually like 4 or 5 different phases of a clinical trial. I was in phase 2 for this trial, and where they opened it to about, I think it was about 180 patients around the world, and it was a randomised trial. So one patient was given the clinical trial drug, the other patient was given the existing drug, and then the clinicians would compare the outcomes of both study groups and work out how it was, how the drug was going, and were they going to persist with the production and the funding of the drug.
And so when you say it worked, what did it do?
Within 5 or 6 days of taking the drug, the 2 tumours in my neck had gone quite mushy. This necklace that I am still wearing sat quite differently on my neck because of the lump in my neck. And then I had a checkup after being on the drug for 4 weeks just to check the side effects, of which there are many. And I said to my doctor, "Can you feel my neck?" And he did, and he said, "I can't feel anything." And then I was to have a CT scan 8 weeks after commencing the drug, which was on the 27th of April of 2009. And the scans came back showing that there was no cancer anywhere in my body. Yes, that clinical trial was an absolute part of my jigsaw puzzle. It wasn't the only piece.
Mm-hmm.
It was a part of everything that I chose to embrace.
Yeah. Of all the people that were on the clinical test, there was 2 survivors.
After I think 4 phases, there was about 2,000 people worldwide that were on that drug, and the 2 people that are left on that drug, as far as I'm aware, is a woman in Korea and myself. That's not to say that it didn't work. It's just saying that we're the only 2 left on it for whatever reasons. It could be that people have chosen to stop, that they've gone on to another trial, they've embraced other modalities of healing, or sadly some of them would have passed.
Yep.
So that is why I'm very quick to say that it is very much a part of my jigsaw puzzle, but I don't believe it was my only answer.
Yeah.
But it was definitely a big part.
It's amazing. Congratulations. It's like, I mean,
Thank you.
To
Yeah,
have your
very
life
grateful.
back is just priceless.
It is.
Priceless.
Yeah.
And not everyone is as lucky, of course,
That's
as
right.
yourself. So your doctor, who is a part of Lifehouse.
That's correct. He's their chief clinical officer.
Tell me about Lifehouse.
Lifehouse is wonderful. It is a comprehensive cancer centre in Camperdown in New South Wales, and it was the incredible vision of the late Professor Chris O'Brien, who sadly died from a brain tumour in 2009. Everything is under the one roof. So when you walk in to the hospital, clinicians, surgeons, researchers, nurses, clinical trials, theatres, day surgery, day therapy, it's all there. It's so lovely to be able to be a part of that facility. And I volunteer there also, and it is just incredible to walk in there and to know that every single person in there is being given the best care that they can have, being faced with such a shocking disease.
What do you do there?
I volunteer there once a week, and I do guided relaxation meditation sessions with patients before they're going into surgery, which can be a really nerve-wracking time because it often signifies that they've had a biopsy and then they've found that they've had cancer. So I do meditations with patients in there, and I also do meditations with patients that are in the wards as well, that may have just come out of surgery, or those that are very unwell, with their families. Sometimes if the patient's sleeping or they've just come out of surgery, that's an anxious time for everybody. It's not, cancer isn't only about the person at the nucleus of the cancer, it is about everyone that surrounds it. So I do that with patients, and they're in day therapy, and it's such a privilege. I'm part of their spiritual care team as well, so if patients just want to talk, I'm there to talk, and it is such a privilege to listen to their stories and to see how they approach cancer and the dignity that each and every person brings to their own diagnosis.
So why this book? This book, Faith, Trust, Gratitude and Cancer.
Yeah.
Those 3 words, faith, trust, gratitude, are those a part of the jigsaw puzzle for you as well?
Very much so. I found that faith, I wrestled with it a bit in the beginning. I wondered whether faith was, people would look upon it as something, as a religious faith. And faith to me is knowing. It's not just it's more than a hope. It's actually knowing. And what I found with my pieces of my jigsaw puzzle, which I feel that you can relate to. Not only mine just happens to be about cancer. I think in relation to a jigsaw puzzle, it can be just hunkering down in that storm and just doing whatever you can to get through the hard times, whether it be, depression, divorce, or anything. And to me, faith was knowing that whatever the outcome was going to be, I was doing everything that was best for me. It may not have been too conventional, it may not be for you or for the next person, but I had faith in everything that I was doing. And then I had to have trust in that instinct and that gut of mine that I was in the perfect place at the perfect time and that everything was happening to me in the right order. But for me, having gratitude for the smallest things, and people may jump to the conclusion that, oh yeah, you're grateful because you're alive, but I was grateful for the smallest things when I was sick. It really was like looking under a microscope and seeing that gratitude of, opening the vegetable crisper, getting the kids' lunch ready and going, all I've got is a cucumber. But I was grateful that I was able to open the vegetable crisper and to see that there was only a cucumber in there. And then, of course, gratitude for everyone that assisted, because I certainly did not do this on my own.
So what is your hope for people when they read this book?
I hope that they understand that I am a really ordinary person, that I'm just a mum. I'm a housewife. I was a part-time worker. And I'm nobody special. I'm just an ordinary person who truly I had to do my very, very best in order to cope, in order to be a mum, to look after my children, to put one foot in front of the other when I was scared out of my brain, where I had no idea if I was even going to see the next Christmas. I absolutely was so frightened, and yet I was able to bring everything together that I needed to bring together to cope, to hope. And when I was sick, all I wanted to see was someone who had survived stage 3B inoperable lung cancer. And it was very hard to find because there were so many stories that were not so good, and I wanted to know, what is Chinese medicine? What did you do? I don't necessarily want to do what you do, but I want to know how you found what to do and how did you get through all of your piles of suggested information, which I found so overwhelming. So it's a book about finding your way. Cancer certainly has played its part, but it's more about just finding a way. And even if someone takes one line out of that book, then I feel that it's been of some assistance to somebody. It's not a book on how to have cancer or what to do, what to eat. It's just my way. When I faced the biggest crossroads of my life, it's just my way and how I did it. That was all.
So there's going to be people that are watching this and your story who have cancer, have somebody they love who's passed from cancer.
Yes.
I know two of my best girlfriends both have lost their mums, one when we were in our 20s and one most recently. I don't know what to say. Like, how do you explain that, losing your mum to such an awful disease?
It's terrible.
It's terrible. It's terrible. And as somebody who has survived it and fought it and is still living, what's your message to the people who are currently suffering and have lost people?
I think for those that are suffering is there's no doubt that it's shocking, and it is coming from someone who's been there and who has a glimpse of what they are going through. It's a terrible illness, and I think to embrace what they would choose to embrace while they're unwell. If they want to scream, then go and jolly well scream the house down. To not, when people say, be positive, it's how can you be positive? But just to take one step at a time, and maybe if all they do that day is have a shower, that's great. That's all. If that's all they can manage, that's all they need to do. So really staying very true to themselves. And for those that are around them, taking direction from the person who is unwell. Sometimes silence is the best friend between a mother and daughter or two friends, and just trying to offer whatever that person is particularly after, and then seeking help and self-care for yourself as well. I know some of my friends had a terribly hard time with me every now and then when they literally had to get me up off the floor. And it was very important that they in turn downloaded onto somebody else. And just to do it, to let the person who is unwell be the driver if they are capable of being the driver. And if it means saying to someone who's driven 50 kilometres to see their friend or their mother, I'm sorry, you can't come in, that's what they need to do, is just support and be there. But it's rough, it's horrible.
It's just such a heavy thing to have to deal with and go through, and just so many people do it and are living with it, and
They are.
in the midst of it. And
They are.
I would imagine you would do exactly what you did, actually anything, to make
Pretty
it
much.
better.
Pretty much.
Like, clean up your diet. That's all of a sudden the easiest thing in the whole world to do, because it's your body and you can control that. Modern medicine, of course, like, you know, give that a go. Chinese medicine, whatever it is, I think desperate situations call for desperate measure.
That's right.
And I would feel like I would do anything to be well and whole and healthy.
Yes, and that's your choice too. And I think for others, they need to choose. When my mother got cancer, she was actually diagnosed with cancer the day that I had my first clear scan. And of course I was like, oh, you have to do everything that I did.
Yes.
You must drink beetroot, carrot and celery juice every day. You have to see a Chinese herbalist. You have to do naturopathy. You have to meditate. And Mum was like, I know, I don't want to. And it was a really big learning lesson for me, because she embraced it her way, which was completely the opposite of my way. But like you, I would, you know, clearly we would do very similar things just to survive. To
And
get
I guess
through it.
there's no right or wrong way.
So it would be very disrespectful for me to think that my way was the right way for everybody. It is clearly not. We're all different.
Well, I think it's very admirable that you've shared your story, and I'm sure to my viewers who are watching in, they will be touched by your story, and hopefully
Thank
it's
you.
helped somebody, you know, who's going through something similar to have hope.
I hope
and
so.
to do something good for themselves.
That's right.
That changes their story. Thank you, Caroline. I appreciate it.
Thank you
a
very
lot.
much, Jules, for having me. It's
You
been
didn't
lovely
have
being
any of
here.
your tea.
I had 2 sips, but I can have it now.
Oh, you did have some of your tea. No, you're
Got
right.
lipstick.
No, thank you so much, and thank you for writing this beautiful book. I know people that it's touched, so I know that it's doing what you wanted it to do.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. I hope so anyway.